When I was 17, I suffered a spinal cord injury and acquired a brain injury. Long story short, I got drunk, fell off a roof and damaged my body pretty bad. But one of the things that I damaged very, very badly was my brain. When I fell, I split the skin away from my skull and my skull was split in multiple places. When I landed on the footpath 7 meters from the roof, the only thing keeping my brain from falling out was somebody holding my skull together. The next part of the story I have told so many times before, so I'm just going to skip ahead to the rehabilitation after my injury. One of the main things that I had a lot of trouble with, apart from the fact that I couldn't walk anymore, was being able to read. And I had to learn how to read all over again. The damage to my brain was the temporal lobe on the right hand side of my brain. And if you know your anatomy of the brain, the right side of the brain affects the left side of your body. So this side of my body has a lot less function than the other side. I also damaged the optic nerve in the brain, which affects my eyesight. I have double vision and also half of the outside of my right eye is blind. The temporal lobe affects memory, reading, and general thought process. So I had a lot of trouble being able to understand what the words were. And my dad got me to write things down. He gave me a journal where I could write things. And I ended up writing letters to people while I was in hospital just to say what's going on and how I'm doing. But the problem that I had with that was that I would write something and then I would forget what I had written, so I would keep writing the same thing over and over again because it didn't register in my brain that I'd already written that down. And if I tried to read back what I had written, I had a lot of trouble doing that. Partially because of the double vision, because at one point it was pretty bad, but now it's a lot more focused. And if I concentrate hard enough, I can make my lazy eye do what I want it to do and not go wandering around in another direction. Writing certain words down helped me to remember what the word is, how to spell it, what it means, and how to put it into a sentence. And it's kind of hard to explain what it was like and what it's like now because it has changed so much since when I was in rehab to where I am now. It's been almost 9 years now. After about 10 months in rehab, the occupational therapist suggested to my dad that I was to start reading a book rather than just writing things down and reading back what I had written. So reading a book was going to be a lot more challenging. And I picked probably the hardest thing to read, which was 1408 by Stephen King. That frustrated me a lot. I couldn't even get through the first page, not because it was written badly, just because I couldn't register in my brain what these words meant. To read the sentence, I had to keep reading the word over and then I would have to go back and read the sentence again because I would forget what the first few words were. After quite a few attempts to read this book, I sort of gave up, and for a few years I didn't really bother to pick up another book, but in that time my memory started to get so much better. I was able to remember letters and numbers very, very easily. It took me about 3 hours to learn the alphabet backwards. It took me about an hour to learn all of my bank details, my bank numbers, so I know my card number, it's all in my head. I know important phone numbers. I found that it was a lot easier to remember letters and numbers rather than letters that's formed into a sentence. And I find it quite difficult to read out loud. It is so frustrating to read out loud. I'll give you an example of me reading out loud. That was what Peter had wanted, to feel himself a part of them, to be one of the men of the long rides. And he had always known this would never happen. Alright, I read a lot faster than that in my head, but just trying to read it out loud is a lot harder because I register the words in my head, but saying the words out loud is so much harder. It wasn't until I think 2012 that I decided that I would give it another crack and see if I could actually finish a book, because the only book I had finished previous to this was Harry Potter and the Order of the Phoenix, which I actually read twice. I read that when I was 15, so about 2 years before my accident. And the book that I decided to pick up was the Evernight series by Claudia Grey. And I got like 50 pages in and I had no idea that this was about vampires. And then I'm like, oh, it's about vampires. The next book that I read after the Evernight series was the Abarat Trilogy by Clive Barker. Now, I read the first and second book and absolutely loved it, but then the third book started to get really weird and really confusing, so I got about halfway through and gave up on that one, and then started reading The Hunger Games. I loved The Hunger Games, but it takes me quite a while to finish a book. So the first Hunger Games book took me about 4 weeks to finish, and yes, that is exceptionally slow. And that is very, very frustrating when I'm reading and I am very into it, but I can't read fast. But you know what they say, practice makes perfect. I read Full Dark, No Stars by Stephen King, which is 4 short stories. Then I read 50 Shades of Grey, which I really enjoyed, and anybody who says that it's dirty and it's porn, yeah, it is, but then I started reading the Soul Seeker trilogy, and I finished the first one and liked it, and then the second book I got about halfway through and it just started getting confusing, so I gave up on that one. It was quite a while until I started reading again, and I decided to finally start reading the Unearthly trilogy. After that, I read Book of Lies by Teri Terry, and that one I was quite amazed at how quickly I got through that. I think it took me 2 weeks to finish that, which is still a long time for somebody who reads fast, but because I read slow, I don't really mind it because I get to take it at my own pace. I don't like rushing myself to read books because I know that if I rush it, that takes me even longer to read it. And after reading that, I read The Book Thief by Marcus Zusak. After reading that, I decided that I would set myself a challenge. So I have started reading The Passage. Now, this book is 950 pages long. So this is my challenge to finish a book that is this massive. And I know this is going to take me quite a while to finish because I'm only about 50 pages in. When I'm reading, the problem that I have is looking at the word, and I might know what that word is, but it takes quite a while for my brain to register that word and to put it into a sentence. I find that words like they and the and then, those words are quite easy, just those simple words. And sometimes I get stuck on a word, and if I do, I just skip that word and keep going to the end of the sentence and it still makes sense to me. If you like this video, please be sure to give it a big thumbs up and please subscribe if you haven't already. If you have any questions, please feel free to write them in the comments and I'm more than happy to answer them. Thank you so much for watching. I love you all and I will see you next week.